Thank you for joining us this evening to celebrate the best in investigative business journalism. My name is Jeff Timmermans. I'm the director of the Reynolds Center, and I'm thrilled to have all of you guys here to help us celebrate these fantastic journalists. The Reynolds Center established the Barlett Steele Awards in 2007 to recognize the importance of investigative business journalism and to promote in-depth, accurate journalism in the public interest, which is our mission at the center. I want to acknowledge the generosity of the Donald W. Reynolds Foundation for the endowment they gave the Reynolds Center that allows us to fund these awards. We do not and never will charge entry fees. And the winners you will meet tonight will receive cash prizes ranging from $1,000 to $3,000 to help support their work. It is a sincere privilege to be able to do that. The awards are named for the only reporting duo to ever receive 2 Pulitzer Prizes for newspaper work and 2 National Magazine Awards for magazine work, Don Barlett and Jim Steele. We are delighted to have Jim Steele with us tonight to help present this year's awards. Jim and I were talking last night about this year's winners and how impressive their work is. It represents the very best that journalism can accomplish. Rigorous and painstaking investigations into key issues affecting ordinary people, revealing sometimes uncomfortable truths, not to mention wrongdoing, and helping to effect change. You'll notice that this year, healthcare is a major theme among this year's winners. This is certainly no accident. Healthcare is big business, and it's a business that is essential for all of us to lead healthy and productive lives. But it's dominated by large, for-profit corporations that want to sell us as much healthcare as they possibly can. And I think all of us, and I'm going to steal one of Jim's anecdotes right now, would rather be healthy enough to spend as little as possible on healthcare. Another thing to note about this year's awards is all the investigative work being done by regional and local news organizations who might lack the resources of national outlets, but who are producing outstanding and impactful journalism. We are delighted to be able to honor their work tonight as well. We will also be honoring an outstanding young journalist, as we do now every year, who represents the very best of the next generation of business investigative journalists. There's a lot to be pessimistic right now about our industry. And our industry has never been under more pressure than it is right now. But tonight, we can be optimistic that there is a tremendous amount of great journalism being committed in this country and a rising cohort of young journalists who will continue the fight. And those are all things we should celebrate tonight. Before we get to the conversation with the gold winners, I want to take a moment to acknowledge all of our award winners this year, even those who may not be physically present, whose investigative work was instrumental in exposing injustice and inspiring a call for change. Starting with the global national category, the Bronze Award goes to a reporting team at Reuters for Fentanyl Express, a multi-part series that revealed the intricacies of the fentanyl supply chain network that brings the deadly drug into the United States, exposing the ease with which ingredients can be obtained from overseas and how U.S. trade rules have made it more difficult to identify and stop these shipments. Maurice, will you join us on the stage, please? The Silver Award in the Global National category goes to reporters from STAT for their Healthcare's Colossus series that revealed how United Health has guaranteed impressive profit growth by purchasing clinics, contracting with the federal government through Medicare Advantage, and instructing doctors to overdiagnose patients. Unfortunately, the team from STAT couldn't be here with us this evening, but we will be sending this award to them. Congratulations to STAT. The Gold Award in the Global National category goes to a stunning investigation by 2 reporters from ProPublica into the exploitative pricing tactics used on life-saving medications. Their investigation shed light on how the greed of pharmaceutical companies, not manufacturing or research costs, drives up the cost of life-saving medication astronomically to maximize company profits, with one such medication having a price tag of 26 times that of its production cost. David, would you like to join us on the stage, please? Congratulations. There we go. Just make sure you get the right. Congratulations.
As usual.
You're walking on.
It's a really well-organized event here.
Exactly. Moving now to the regional local category. The Bronze Award goes to the podcast series Fumed by Public Health Watch, which follows two unlikely community members turned environmental activists as they fight the petrochemical industry's abuses in their home city amidst a lack of federal oversight. Guys, you want to come up on the stage? The Silver Award goes to KRE 11's Recovery, Inc. investigation into the corruption lurking in the Minnesota Addiction Recovery Treatment Centers, where falsified treatment records were being used for fraudulent medical billing, while vulnerable people were left without the care they needed. AJ, do you want to come up? The Gold Award in the regional local category goes to the San Francisco Chronicle for uncovering the systemic use of a flawed estimator tool, 360 Value, which uses faulty data and how it was used, still, despite the awareness of its flaws, by several major insurers to set coverage limits. This left homeowners drastically underinsured, leaving many victims of the early 2025 California fires unable to rebuild their homes and communities. Guys, you want to come on the stage? Now for this year's Outstanding Young Journalist Award. The award goes to Alexa York at The Blade for her investigation that uncovered contaminated groundwater near an old Cold War weapons site, despite government assurances that it was contained. Independent testing revealed levels far higher than government limits. The story drew immediate attention and action, with federal, state, and local investigations looking into the water quality in Lucky, Ohio. Alexa, come on the stage. So now we've got to the moment you've all been waiting for. Jim Steele is going to moderate a discussion with our Gold Award winners. They will be taking questions. We have a microphone set up in the middle aisle there, so please feel free to go queue up if you have questions, and they'll be delighted to answer. Jim.
Okay.
Guys, coming up?
Yeah.
Alexa's, well, yeah. Yeah.
Well, greetings all of you. Is this on? Yeah, it is. Always ask that question. I've said this before and I'll say it again. I am so glad I'm not a judge of this contest. because the quality of everything is so good. And I have judge contests, and it's a very painful thing you have to do to try to decide one over the other. And so fortunately, I didn't have to do any of this because all of this work was just so spectacular. One thing that struck me by reading almost every one of these, and this is the thing I think we in journalism should always remember. You know, our job is to really push back on the powerful who are trying to take advantage of other people or ignoring their responsibilities in this world. And that's what you see in all of these stories. You know, there's great commitment to shine a light in areas that need to be discovered and revealed. And I'm just going to talk to you about how you did this, what some of the obstacles that you encountered were, and at the same time applaud you for some outstanding work. So, David, I want to start with you. Just tell us how you got onto you and your colleague Robin got onto this whole story, and how it began, and what some of the first steps you took to make it happen.
Sure. Interestingly enough, Robin and I were working on separate parallel tracks. You know, it wasn't conceived as a project, so to speak. We just happened to have two stories that were very similar that we were launched on. You know, my story arises from my own cancer diagnosis, and I've been a healthcare investigative reporter, you know, off and on for 20 years. And, you know, never really utilized the healthcare system, even though I wrote quite a bit about it. So it was a completely different perspective for me to be a patient, essentially. And in the case of my story, I was really interested in a particular drug that I was receiving, a drug that is very helpful to me. And the drug is thalidomide, which some of you may know the history of thalidomide. It was a really sort of disgraced drug that caused horrible fetal malformations in the 50s and 60s. And when I was in the hospital, one of my doctors said, well, you know, we've come a long way with treatment. You're going to get this and that, and we're going to give you a version of thalidomide. And I jumped up in my bed. I knew the story of thalidomide, but not what had happened afterwards. So I kind of knew in that moment, even though it was a really, you know, sort of dark moment, that this would be something I want to know more about. And that led to really there's a remarkable story about the discovery of this drug and how it helps in cancer, you know, after it did so much harm. And the second part of the story occurred after I received my first health insurance bill, or explanation of benefits, as they like to call it. And that explanation said that my health plan, which is funded by me and my employer, was paying $1,000 a pill for a pill that cost 25 cents to make. So I wanted to know how that was possible. We know drugs are expensive in this country, but how is that possible? How did this happen? And that's how I started on this path of the story that we ended up writing.
And one of the things that struck me about it, and also the work Robin did as well, is that I can't remember if this was true with thalidomide, but certainly in the story that she did, there was a lot of public financing of some of the research that led to the drug that she wrote about, which then is also being charged exorbitant prices to administer, which is, I think, a very significant public issue. Why should the public be paying that to create these new drugs, and then companies make a fortune as a result? One of the things you hear, I've written about healthcare myself a couple of times, and one of the things you hear is that the drug companies need these profits in order to create the research to create these great breakthrough drugs. But the fact of the matter is they sell all of these drugs in other countries as well, which have much stronger price controls and limitations on what you can charge. So, and I don't think they're selling those for free over there as well. So, you know, we in this country pay the price through our health system, through personal costs, whatever, for this kind of care. And it's, I think both the projects you did just really exposed this really beautifully. And it's an ongoing crisis, I think, in this country.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point, Jim. government funding was absolutely crucial in the development of thalidomide as a cancer drug, as it is for almost every cancer drug in this country.
Right.
In fact, all but I think 5 or 6 of the 350 drugs approved by the FDA in the past 10 years had government funding. And that's why it's such an important issue today, because you don't know what you know or you don't know about future discoveries. You don't know what you're missing, but the failure to fund developments like this and the research that goes on in academic labs will have a cost down the road.
Right, absolutely. Very good point. And I was not aware of that statistic. I guess I missed that in your story. That's an astonishing number, really. Really. Megan, tell us about your project, the insurers in California, and how you got onto it, and what some of the obstacles were, and what, anyway, explain to us how you got onto it and how it came out.
Yeah, absolutely. Most of the focus of my reporting on home insurance prior to the start of last year was talking about the unavailability and the price of insurance in California, which has skyrocketed. What came to mind with this project was actually Susie walking over to me in the newsroom, and she had seen reporting coming out of Hurricane Helene on the East Coast about insurers cutting down on the estimates that they were paying to hurricane victims, and she said, "Is it possible this is happening in California?" And I said, well, let me send an email. And I emailed the California Department of Insurance, and I said, very simply, if you investigate an insurance company, where do the records of that investigation live? And I expected the answer to be, well, you're going to have to submit this complicated records request, and then we're going to take 2 weeks to get back to you, and we're going to tell you that we can't give it to you. And instead, the answer was a link to their website. In a stunning act of government transparency we don't often see. And so what happened next was Susie and I sitting on 2 couches in our newsroom and pouring through probably over 1,000 pages of documents where we were just searching up the largest insurance companies in California and trying to parse through these incredibly dense regulatory documents. But the word that kept sticking out to us that we were finding in every single one of these was this term called 360 value, which was the algorithm that we went on to investigate in this story. And so unlike many pieces of journalism, it didn't start with finding the impact and the harm. It started with this problem that we had identified, that the government had fined many major insurers over many years without really letting the public know about this algorithm that they found was leading many homeowners to not have enough insurance when their homes burnt down in a wildfire, and that these companies had continued to use this algorithm. And then it turned into us driving across wildfire communities in California where the vast majority of houses had never been rebuilt, and where residents were living in trailers or were homeless, and talking to people there about the impact that this underinsurance problem had had on them. And 3 months into this, 16,000 homes in Los Angeles burned down. And I'm not sure what might have happened with this project if that had not happened, but then the immediacy of the problem became apparent to us, and we really hit go on this.
Tell us about that algorithm. Do you know who developed that? And did all the insurance companies then immediately embrace it?
Yeah. So this algorithm is produced by a company in New Jersey called Verisk, which had its roots as a trade organization among insurance companies that was forced to turn into a private company because they were sued over antitrust violations by several attorney generals, and continues to provide several types of software to the insurance companies. And as of the time that we were writing, makes up 2/3 of the insurance industry in the U.S. and the vast majority in California, and the ways that they estimate the value of homes. And so most homeowners in California have come across the 360 value algorithm when they signed up for their home insurance policy, but were not told, and simply got something by the agent saying, we think you need this much coverage. And we're not given a warning that an algorithm was being used to create that estimate, and that if the information, that algorithm was incorrect in any way, that it was going to mean they didn't have the right insurance they needed if a wildfire came. And so the struggle for us became not identifying the problems with the algorithm so much as finding examples of where it had been used because of how untransparent the process was for homeowners.
How'd you do that?
So it came down to just an extensive amount of interviewing people and seeing what documents they had, which was very difficult because many of these people's insurance policies burned down in the fires that took their homes. And really tracing down to the main character that we opened the story with, who was a very rare case where he pushed back against his insurance agent and said, I don't believe this number that you're giving me. how do you know that this is how much insurance I need? And later found out, of course, that that number was far too low. But the surprising thing that we didn't learn about until after we published is that once we published our story, we had all of the evidence to suggest that this algorithm was used, but again, this homeowner had never been told for sure. And after we published the story, his home insurance company reached out to him and said, here's 7 estimates that were run through this algorithm on the day you purchased your insurance policy. The first and the lowest one he had gotten was the number his agent had recommended, and then the agent had run it 7 more times with different pieces of information to give him different estimates to see which one he would take. And
I love this story also from the standpoint that they began by asking a question. An awful lot of investigative projects begin that way, not with a grand idea of everything you're going to do, but why is this happening? What caused this? And that leads to some great stories from time to time. And Alexa, tell us about you're a native of that area that you wrote about, right there in that part of Ohio. If I'm not, tell us how you got interested in this, which, if I'm not mistaken, reading your stories goes way back. And what obstacles you encountered, and what did you learn along the way?
Yes. So I think one of the unique things about the investigation that I did is that I got to report in the community that I grew up in. And I also wasn't a journalist at the time. So this was my entry into journalism. And it was accidental and involuntary. And what you just said about Jim, about like most investigations start with a question. Well, the question for me was, I was driving by this military cleanup site. It was a nuclear site. It was right on the edge of my hometown. And it was a Cold War weapons site. And I saw some bulldozers driving around on it, and I thought, well, why is the military cleaning up this site? Why isn't the EPA there cleaning it up? And so that was my question. And that was when I started digging into records. And with every question I tried to answer, 5 more popped up. And I got deeper and deeper and deeper into this. And after about 2.5 years, I was doing this off and on for a long time, I reached out to a journalist by the name of Sam Rowe. He worked at the Chicago Tribune, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, as well as the Toledo Blade about 20 years ago or so. But he had written about this topic before. And the way he wrote was unlike anything else I had read. No one had really done in-depth writing like he had on this topic. So my thinking was, well, this guy can probably help me, because I don't really know what to do. I had so much information, and there was really no clear way to do anything with it. So I emailed him, and I told him, like, look, I have like a lot of info on this site. Like, please help me. And he replied within like 15 minutes and gave me his cell number, and he said, let's talk tomorrow morning. And so we did. And I kind of told him loosely what I had found, and he agreed to mentor me. I was unemployed at this point, by the way. I did a lot of this work for free before I started working at the Blade. So we worked on a story pitch for about 6 weeks or so. And he emailed the executive editor at the Blade, Kim Bates, and he kind of said, like, look, we have a story for you. So he drove all the way from Chicago to Toledo, and we pitched the story at the Blade. And Kim offered me an internship, which I think was a big risk. So Sam took a big risk, with me having no journalism experience, and then Kim trusted Sam, which was another lucky break for me, I guess. So Kim offered me an internship, and I worked at the Blade for 3 months as an intern. That was kind of my test run as a journalist to make sure I was okay. But they hired me full-time in June of 2024. So I kept working on this story. I was a general assignment reporter, too, so I got some practice writing on deadline and covering events, and that helped me, I think, with the story in the end. But yeah, I mean, it was something that was really, really special, being able to go through all of those documents, and I had a lot of time, which I'm so grateful for. And it was something that was a lot of fun and a lot of emotions all wrapped up into one.
Were most of those documents online at the time, or did you have to do FOI requests? Or?
So it was a mix. I found some documents at the Library of Congress, and that was one thing that really got me to email Sam and reach out to Sam. I started by going to the Lucky Library, which is a repository for the Army Corps of Engineers who was cleaning up the site. they had a repository for Lucky records. And it was like a CD. So I plugged in this CD to a computer at the Lucky Library and copied everything to my Google Drive. That was back in 2021, so a while ago. And the only place you could get that was in person in Lucky, or you'd have to go to their headquarters in Buffalo, New York. So they really didn't make it easy. So those were sort of online, I guess. It took me a long time to go through those in my Google Drive. But then I went to the Library of Congress because there was just a collection that by the name of, from a man by the name of Merrill Eisenbud. And he had done some work on the Lucky site back in the 1950s. He's long dead. He died in 1997. So this story spanned 80 years, which is another thing that was special. But in that, I found, surprisingly, documents on Lucky that were declassified about worker exposures at the plant. It had secret, declassified, and I had never seen these before. They weren't in the Army Corps records. I had no idea they existed, and it was a complete surprise to me that they were in the Library of Congress just sitting in a folder. I don't think anyone had ever found it before. That was kind of the turning point for me, oh man, there really is something here, I got to keep going on this. And I think that was about 6 months before I reached out to Sam. So it was a big mix of paper, online, and I got some documents from a lawyer as well, so that helped a lot too.
That's good. Let me talk to the three of you about your whole process. David, were you discouraged at any time when you were doing your piece as to how, any particular obstacle that you ran into? Yours is a little different, obviously, because it's a personal story, and a very powerful personal story. Anybody who hasn't read it, I really recommend you read both of these things out of ProPublica. But was there any time when you were wondering, where is this going, or what do I need to do to push it over the finish line?
I have those thoughts frequently, not just the story.
So actually, you're a journalist, is what you're saying.
Also, just to Alexa's point real quick, I think she makes a really important point about, and I talk to this with students from time to time, there's so much online these days that I think a lot of people think that's all they need to search. Right. And going to a library, and librarians are so helpful. They want nothing more than to help you find what you're looking for. They're the best people in the world.
So true.
So I think that's a really important thing. And even court records, they're not generally online. I mean, you can't free text search for most of them. You got to go get into the records and dig them out. And that's where a lot of the great stuff really rests, I think. But in terms of obstacles, I mean, just the normal things about, how are we going to write this story? Because we had two different stories. We had the story of discovery and then the story of exploitation. So wrestling that and reconciling that was a challenge. But, I was really gifted to have two editors who worked on this story who were terrific and really pushed me to write it as a first-person story, which I was uncomfortable with and I had never done before. And I sort of backed into it in the first draft. And they're like, no, we're either in or we're out. and so I went in and was grateful in the end that we did it that way because it really resonated with people. I think it made the story much more powerful when you could have a person who's actually experienced these things write about it while also doing the investigating.
Exactly. Megan, how about you? Obstacles or things that you ran into during this that were discouraging? I mean, we all have these things, but I'm just curious what they were in your case and how you felt at the time and how you overcame it.
When Susie and I first pitched this story for several weeks, the managing editor at the Chronicle would pull us into his office once a week and sit us down and say, are you sure that insurance companies have an incentive to sell you less insurance? And at the time, we were thinking, yes, we have read all these documents, we've spoken to these people, we think so. And if not for those challenges to the reporting early on, I don't think we would have developed the confidence that we needed to develop a piece that was not only explanatory in the problem, but also dug deeply into the accountability of who knew about this problem and what was the incentive. It is, on its face, a very interesting business issue because they are making less money by selling you less insurance, but the argument, of course, is that if they can sell more people less insurance, then they'll make more money. at the same time, in California, we're in an environment where people are themselves sometimes buying less insurance because they can't afford it. And insurance companies have, and many times, stopped writing insurance altogether for some of these homeowners. So it was very challenging to reconcile this problem that had been going on for 20 years in California with the very recent developments in the market. And so I think the final piece, we're proud of the fact that we navigated how these two issues relate to each other and how difficult it is to balance these issues as a homeowner when you're thinking about how low the risk is that you'll really lose your home to a wildfire, and yet how severe the impact is when you do, and you completely lose all of your life savings.
Alexa, how about you? What any particular obstacles that I've often described this process of investigating as sort of like pushing string uphill part of the time. But how did you find it? What any particular point where not that you were going to give up? I think you were clearly committed to this from the beginning. You can see that. But what did you run into at a time or two that frustrated you, that you had to work around?
I think the biggest obstacle for me is that I wasn't a journalist, and I didn't understand the process, and I didn't see the path to the finish line. So I had to put a lot of trust in my editors. I argued with them a lot. I was like, I don't know if I should do this. Like, my name is going to be on this. Like, I mean, I was risking my whole reputation for it, trying not to get sued. And it was a lot to take in, you know, for someone who didn't really sign up for it. But, I mean, I did trust the process. I learned to trust my editors. And I think it turned out pretty well. I'm really proud of how it turned out, yeah. Yeah,
I think a pretty wide agreement on that one. One of the things that we're talking about, it's really interesting, and we got to a question here. If anybody wants to talk about this, please do. When you read one of these stories, any one of these projects, they're all very well done, the writing is very good, but that's just not the way information comes to us. I mean, it comes in drips and drabs, and you figure, where does this go? And the whole process of putting something together is one of the most challenging things of long-form journalism. And once it's done, and it reads nicely, everybody thinks, well, gosh, that person really knows how to write beautifully. They don't realize behind that screen there's been all this agony of trying to move this, that, and the other thing every which way. But all three of these projects really read very beautifully, and I really congratulate you all for what you've done. So, are we have about almost another half an hour here. Does anybody have any questions you'd like to ask anybody about the process? Here we go.
Hi. How do I? Oh, yeah. My name is Quinn. I'm a graduate student here at Cronkite, originally from Vietnam. I think I said this before earlier today, that is really inspiring and impressive to witness and listen to your stories and your investigation, like all of you guys here. I have one question for all of you. So in the long process of finding all the details and stories, how do you decide what to leave out with your final piece, especially everything seems really important?
Anybody want to jump on that?
Editors are helpful with that. And I think I said to one of the classes today that one of the things I do when I write my first draft, I let it sit for a couple of days, and then I go back and cut it by a third. And you'll be amazed at how much you realize you don't need. At least I am all the time. And then, you'll submit it, and then you'll likely get it back, and you'll be told to cut it by a third again. And you'll scream and yell and squawk about it. But ultimately, it's probably the right call. So I think it's just a matter of really, whether it's self-pressure or pressure from an editor, when you're directed to find a way to make your story tighter, fewer words, it can be done. And I'm always surprised by just, how wordy things I've done are, or it's sometimes repetitive. But when you have to do it, you'll find it.
Also something that David brought up to students, but I think really resonated with Susie and I's process too. When you're working on an investigative piece, you have so much evidence before you, and you know that the entity or the person you're writing about is probably going to push back on most of it. And so also, taking that first draft and saying, how much of this would I go to court over? There are things that we know to be true, but maybe stood on shakier ground than other things. We had the extreme benefit of, in this case, having a legal case where the lawyers for the insurance company missed the deadline to reseal documents. And so we had this undiscovered trove of evidence that came directly from the internal emails of the insurance company. And then we, of course, had anecdotal evidence from insurance agents who had been working for these companies for years and who could tell us intimately about the process. And so, in that circumstance, we trusted these agents and their experience in being sort of in the middle of this process, but the words of the insurance company executives themselves looking into this issue was not only extremely illustrative to hear from them directly, but also was unimpeachable because this was coming from legal documents and was coming straight from the insurance company themselves. And you mentioned, there are things in the story you wish you could put in there, but it just isn't worth the risk. And so I think that's also part of it too, is considering, how much of this will I stake my reputation on, and making those choices in your story.
And then I guess for me, not to piggyback off of what David and Megan said, but I relied heavily on my editors, and I also had to rely on what evidence is irrefutable. What can we double and triple check? How do we know this for sure? There's always so many things that you want to include, but you can't. Things that you know that are true, but you just can't say it because you can't prove it. And I ran into that a lot. Fortunately, I had a lot of interesting material to go through and to pick through and decide what was worth it and what wasn't. But yeah, there was a lot of arguing with my editors and relying heavily on them and their advice and what they thought. But short and tight is the way to go. Yeah.
I just want to second one thing David said, because I've experienced this myself. Once you get something out, it's just so important to step away from it. Half a day, 2 days, a week, whatever kind of time you have, because sometimes when you've had a problem, it's amazing how it clears up when you just stay away from it. I think the brain is like a muscle or something, and when you're all into your projects, it gets tight as such, and you step away, things become very clear. The great John McPhee had some wonderful quotes about this. He said when he was a young man, he was the way he wrote was like with a chisel and a hammer, hammering through a granite mountain. He said when he got older, he just blazed a trail around it, and then came back up and fixed up what wasn't right. But that's so important when you're writing. And I've talked to a lot of kids today about this. It's just get it out, and then you can see what needs to go, see how important something is or isn't. It's just so much clearer once you get the draft out. And a lot of people don't realize that writing is really rewriting. And nobody sits down and it just all flows out of their fingers. And if I ever meet somebody like that, well, the hell with them. That's all I can say. Anyway.
One other thing, Jim, I do is just a little trick for me is I'll print it out too, because it just looks and reads differently in the various formats that we read in. So put it aside, print it out, read it, and then go back at it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Precisely.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. My name is Suzio Chitete. I'm a journalist from Malawi and a Humphrey Fellow here at the Cronkite. On the same question, I want to grab a tip from you. Just how do you remain organized? When you're exposing yourself to too many documents, in the course of doing your investigation, more and more information is coming, which may also take you off the lane and begin to chase something completely different. I would want to learn from you.
For me, I have a Google Drive with probably 400 different folders at this point. I know some people use different software and things, but I wasn't savvy, when I first started doing this, so I kind of stuck with the process that worked for me. I love Google Drive. And I organized everything by date. So since I was doing a story that spanned over 80 years, it was really, really important that I knew when everything was published. So I put, for the title of every PDF, it would be the date, the year, the month, the day, and then what agency it was, and then what the document said, and then after that I'd put in brackets like what my takeaways were, whether it was like worth looking at or not, whether it was a key document. So I kind of made that up by myself. I don't know if other people do something similar. I really have no idea, but yeah, that really worked, and I was able to find pretty much anything I needed easily. Yeah.
Organization of these things is, I think, something we all grapple with. But whatever system you come up with, the one thing I urge people to do, and nobody likes to hear this, I want to assure you that, and that is to go back and reread a lot of what you've collected. I don't know if any of you, I'm sure some of you have done an interview and you sat right there and you transcribed it later and you were surprised with some things that the person said even though you were right there in the room. The same thing's true of a document because you learn things at different periods. And so something may be in this piece of paper that you read earlier but meant nothing to you because it was only later that the significance of it became apparent. So I found rereading stuff from interviews, reports, the second and third time sometimes you learn a lot. And every time that happens to me, I think, why didn't I see this the first time through? But there's something about the mind can only absorb so many things at any given moment. So that's the way I work around that.
Yeah, I think, those government investigations that were confounding to us when we started, we went back and breezed through and said, oh, of course, all the evidence was here all along. But I will say, and I should first say that my partner Susie Nielsen is an expert at organization and has weekly memos for every week that we worked on this and exactly what we did. But I think a strategy that worked for us as well was in some ways abandoning organization, because when you think about how to whittle down this mountain of evidence that you have, it really is the things that you don't even have to think about, the things that have stuck with you since the beginning of your investigation. For us, that was little details about the homeowners that we spoke with, about the conditions that they were still living in today, and about the details and the documents, the studies that these insurance companies had done about the effectiveness. I think one line that we kept coming back to was, this line from the insurance company that said, our legal department has advised that we might have some litigation on this, time to stop emailing each other. In some ways those became guideposts to the investigations because that was the closest we were to the reader perspective when we were first learning about this issue. And so to think about what to a lay person is most captivating about this topic, what do we hope they will remember when they finish our story, really helped us outline sort of what are the most important points that we need to hit in this. And then it was a matter of going back through all of those weekly memos and incredibly long documents and filling in the gaps between those things.
That's the exciting part of our job, isn't it? Just kidding. Anyway, but the necessary part. Anyway, yes.
Hi, I'm Jocelyn Goodwin. I'm also a graduate student at the Cronkite School studying investigative journalism. My question for all of you is really around, based off these investigations that you did, what are key takeaways that you learned from them that you are applying or applied to other stories that kind of stuck out in terms of how you reported, how you interacted with sources, and things like that?
I think for me, I don't know if there's a key takeaway, but you always learn something, hopefully. I talked about this in one or two of the classes, so Megan's familiar with this story. But I made an assumption about somebody I was interviewing where I didn't feel like we needed to record our conversations. I didn't feel it was adversarial. This was a physician, a doctor. She always took my calls, made time for me. And when I did the fact check, she denied saying something to me that she had said. And, I thought to myself, well, geez, I really should have recorded those conversations. I shouldn't have assumed that this wasn't going to be a problem. And at the end of the day, I didn't use the quote because it wasn't central to the story. But I guess you always have to guard against making assumptions about things. No matter how long you've been doing this, people always surprise you. Documents always surprise you. And I think it's important just to keep that in mind no matter what you're doing.
I think for me, I suddenly found myself in the world of defense contracting. And I was for context, I was a music major in undergrad, music education, and I minored in German. And I had no background in this, nor was I interested in it. So I suddenly had to learn about aerospace, the Cold War. I didn't really even know much about the Cold War when I started. About the metal beryllium, which was produced at this site. And I just had to have a lot of background information. But in doing that, I kind of learned the playbook that these contractors and companies use. And it's kind of similar to, like what the tobacco industry did. Just what they used to kind of deceive the public and say, well, here, what you see here is not, like what you think is happening is not really happening. Like there's nothing to see here, like let's move along. And they did the same thing for, 80 years, essentially. So I think learning to read in between the lines was a skill that took a while to develop, and there's a certain way legally that companies say something to make you try and think one thing, but it's not actually true. So I think, if that makes sense, yeah, I think learning to read in between the lines is something that I'm going to apply to my future stories.
Yeah, and I think very similarly, always taking the question as far as you can take it. We started sort of with the question of why are so many of these homes that burned down in wildfires never going back up? In the story we talk about how in several communities in California, in Grizzly Flats, which is one community we highlight in the story, and Paradise, which was the site of our largest and deadliest wildfire, a third of these homes have been rebuilt years after they burned down. And so you could go one step further and say, okay, well, many of these people didn't have enough insurance, which a lot of media had reported in the past. And then you could go one step further and say, well, here's how coverage limits work. It takes you a really long time to drill down to this very specific algorithm that homeowners are using and the very specific problems with the data that's in it. And I think many times we're journalists that are asked to put out a lot of stories and do not have the luxury of the time to drill that deeply on it. But just starting on that first level, what's the deeper thing going on here? How can I question what might have been reported in the past and go deeper than just the phenomenon and get into the causes, into the regulations, into the business incentives behind it? I think will lead you to really, really rich stories that you might not get into if you just take for granted what's already been reported in the past.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm David Leffler with Public Health Watch. Just being in classrooms with each of you today and talking to you between sessions, I think something that struck me about all of y'all's stories is that, you always hear stories of journalists parachuting into places, but each one of you have very distinct connections to your stories. David, obviously having your own cancer diagnosis and then investigating this, and I imagine, thinking about people who couldn't access that drug, or you talked about, I would like to hear you talk about, hearing the health insurance people laugh at claims they're going to reject. Obviously you talked about how this is something you wrote in your hometown, right, Alexa, and that the personal connection that comes with that. And then Megan, you talked about looking into fires that happened in the Paradise area and other places like that you went to as a child for a camp and things like that. So how did those kind of personal connections to these stories shape these investigations for you, help you empathize with your sources, and really kind of help push this over the finish line at times whenever you were a little bit exhausted?
Well, I think for me, one of the really meaningful parts of what I was doing was talking to other patients. And I was fortunate, my health plan, my out-of-pocket the first year of treatment was, maybe a couple $1,000s for $1.2 million of care. And that's not the billed amount, that's the paid amount. It's extraordinarily expensive. But I talked to patients who had really crappy health plans. There is some financial assistance available for people, but for a long time, Medicare patients couldn't take advantage of that because it would be considered a kickback. And to hear their stories, to hear people who are already sick have to struggle to find a way to pay to dip into their retirement fund. I talked to one woman who said she no longer has a retirement fund, because of what she was forced to do to pay for her treatment. That really empowered me in writing and investigating this story. It helped to drive me because even though personally, I didn't suffer a big financial cost. So many people did. And you know, it does affect the health care system writ large. Everybody in here who has insurance through a private employer has probably seen their premiums increase every year. You know, for us, which is a nonprofit organization, the first year that I was getting treated, insurers came back to us and said they're going to raise our premiums 50% across the board. You know, that takes away from money we can spend on journalism. So whether it affects you individually or not, it affects you in a global way. We all pay. So that really helped to drive me and to understand why this thing was so expensive.
For me, I guess I felt like there was a deep sense of injustice. I felt like there had been a great wrongdoing that had been done. And I felt like it was a story that hadn't been told. And like the further I got, the more stuff I found that was just like, wow, this is crazy. I have to tell this. I have to tell this story. So I think there was like a sense of moral integrity. I felt like I had to do something morally, and I couldn't let it go. Clearly, I couldn't let it go. And I also hated to see the government lying, honestly. It really, really nagged at me, and it kept me up at night. I lost a lot of sleep over this. But to see in documents like the government saying one thing to the media, you know, decades ago, and then internally I see the exact opposite happening, yeah, I mean, that kept me going. It's like, yeah, this is a story that needs to be told. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think for the rest of my life, I won't forget when Susie and I drove to Grizzly Flats for the first time, and we stood up on the hill where the elementary school used to be, and you could not, in any direction, see anything that had not been burned down by a wildfire. And just the scope and the scale of the problem, that even as someone who had been covering insurance and covering wildfires had never struck me until we stood there. And the desire to help other Native Californians understand the experience of standing there and seeing the devastation and not seeing a home for miles where they had been before really drove me as someone who is a Native Californian who grew up going to these places on vacation and for summer camp, of bringing people into that devastation. And also, you know, a question for me, someone who doesn't own a home yet, is how does this impact my ability to live in my home state? What if I face this problem one day, living in some of the most beautiful parts of our state? And so that was deeply personal to me, because it was not just about this problem with insurance companies or trying to nail them on something. It was about this really philosophical question about how is this impacting my community, and how is it impacting the dream that I've had for years, of course, which is to own a home in my own home state. And it really tapped into the impact that climate change is having on our financial institutions, and the way that these many, many homeowners who shared their stories with us from years past are the canaries in the coal mine for what the rest of us might face as climate disasters become more common.
Hi, my name is Inji. I'm a journalist from South Korea, and I'm doing a journalism fellowship at Cronkite School. So my question is that based on my experience, when I was working on the story for a long time, there is always a point that I find the facts that I'm looking for, and then I start to worry about it because someone might break the story first. So what I wanted to ask to you, all of you, was that have you ever felt this kind of anxiety, and how did you manage it?
I'm feeling it right now. Yeah, I think it's a constant balance because, you know, in some ways you want to be first. We all want to be first, but you also want to be comprehensive. And so I think at a certain point, you know, we did have the experience where one of our sources said, I just got an email from this other reporter saying, what is 360 value? And we had a crisis meeting. But I think what we came back to was that we were at a point where no one was going to be more comprehensive than we were going to be. And if there was going to be more cursory coverage of what is this algorithm or what is under insurance, that we were fine with it, because what we were after was truly the production of new knowledge around this algorithm and its impacts. And so I think it is a constant worry and something that keeps us up at night. But I think the mission at the end of the day is not to be solely to be the first person. It's to be the most comprehensive and most impactful version that is truly going to impact lives.
I'll say hear to that one, because really, I mean, the temptation when you're doing a project that may take weeks or months is that you'll come across something that's really pretty amazing, and there's that temptation to break that off. But the best course is just to do really what Megan's saying, just stick with it, keep that whole package together, because ultimately that's going to be more powerful overall than that snippet that you break off. And so many stories, not the ones up here, but so many stories have been covered in one little way or another over time. I mean, a lot of the stories that Don Barlett and I did over the years, bits of those stories had previously appeared. Just a tiny bit of them. But there's not, when you put together a comprehensive thing and you really show the full picture, it has a much greater impact on readers and viewers than just that piece you may be breaking off that maybe gets that big headline that day. So, and I think that's really the future of long-form journalism. I mean, not just, the headline of the day, but just stick with it. Because that's where we as journalists are really different, I think, rather than just whatever that spot news is of the day. Stick with it, give that full story. People want that, and that's more value too.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to jump on Jim's point, there is always that dilemma when you find someone's, hot on your trail. What do we do? I think what's been gratifying, these days we can measure readership in very precise, scary ways. And, what we found, just the story that I did, it was really widely read, but what was really impressive and gratifying was people read it for a long time. You can measure, all of you probably know this, how many minutes somebody stays with a story. I think there's a thirst for stories that tell about events in a comprehensive way, or that they haven't experienced before. Because even my story in the discovery of this drug, there's been stories about it. It's been stories about how expensive this drug is, but there wasn't a story that put it all together, and people read it.
I agree. And I think that's really the future of our business in many ways. When I began a long time ago in Kansas City, there were even readers' surveys at the time that said people didn't read stories that jumped off the first page. Can you believe that? The silliness of that? Of course, maybe those are terribly poorly written stories that they were being pulled on. But if the story is well done and interesting, and you've structured it properly, people are going to read it or watch it or listen to it, whatever the case may be. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I'm Maya. I'm also a grad student in Cronkite, and I'm curious with your stories. They're very in-depth, and you're reporting on them over a long period of time, and it requires a lot of careful analysis. So I'm wondering how you guys approached kind of organizing your time to make sure that you're being efficient and delivering the story on time, but also if there are points when you faced unexpected delays and maybe had to negotiate with editors for more time.
For me, I did some groundwater testing with my story, and that was a big part of the first story, was the groundwater testing. And we tested for radioactivity. But what I didn't know going in is that it takes 5 weeks for results to come back, which is not the same as a lot of other groundwater testing. You can get the results right away. So what we ended up doing is we would do a round of testing and then ship it off. And then in those 5 weeks that I was waiting to see what it showed, that's when I would go do more of the research. I would go out and interview people, or do my general assignment reporting as well. So I ended up having to, it kind of structured my time in these 5-week intervals. And that was also, I think, an unexpected delay. We expected the testing to go a lot more quickly than it did. We probably did 4 or 5 different rounds of those 5-week periods, and they were excruciating to wait for.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just think, too, when you're working on these, it's easy to lose perspective of how much you are getting done because it feels like rolling string up a hill. And so, having a weekly check-in with your editor was something David brought up earlier today, but also writing yourself memos like Susie and I did remind yourself of your progress and to really plot out what your next steps are, I think is really important. And so also then if you get dragged into general assignment, or when the Los Angeles wildfires were happening, Susie and I went down there and we're doing other stories down there, having that document that you can pick back up and get right back to where you were is really important.
I think it's hard these days too when a lot of us are working remotely, to really kind of stay on it. And I'm easily distracted, I will admit that. So I try to find ways to focus or say, this is what I'm going to do from 12 to 4, and try and do it. I have a friend who every day has breakfast, then goes for a walk. And when the door opens as he comes back, that's work time. Mentally he transitions during the walk and comes in and focuses. So I think you have to find tricks to keep yourself going. I have a weekly check-in with my editor where, I tell her everything I found out in the past week. And that's a good motivator because you don't want to disappoint your editor. So I think just finding various ways to get yourself going is really important, especially these days.
Everybody finds their own system, but I think what you're talking about, talking to your editor, is a good one, because the thing that I found over the years with myself and colleagues in the business, sometimes when you just talk something through that's already in you, it suddenly gets to be clearer in a way that it wasn't up in your head. So any of those devices that you use, and we all find them, it's a very imperfect science that we're involved in, but whatever works for you is good, and you have to find that. But the main thing is to try to keep it going. I mean, there's in any long-range project or any project that isn't spot news, there are these moments where nothing seems to be happening. And when that happens to you, realize it's just not personal. That's just the way it is. And figure out some way to work around that, something you can do during those moments. I was talking today about writing. Sometimes you can't figure out what the lead of a story is. Then write some other part of it. Write down in it something you know is going to be part of that story. Just get it out, because it's going to have to be written anyway. And it's wonderful for your mental health to keep that going. So.
Well, that's a fantastic place to leave it. I'm sorry to have to end the discussion. It's been a fantastic, fantastic evening. Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you to our panelists, to all of our award winners, and especially you guys for asking such fantastic questions. This is certainly the highlight of the year for us at the Reynolds Center, and it's because all of you guys give us an opportunity to celebrate this tonight. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you, guys.